I know that grammar is something most people only think about when they're playing Mad Libs, but pronoun use has been something that's been debated a lot lately, along with trans rights and the whole idea of gender. In this video, I'm just going to focus on the grammar side. I'm not going to get into the political aspects. But I've been teaching English for 8 years, both in the US and in Europe, and so I've had to deal with this question a lot in my own classes. I have a couple of points I want to make off this topic, and I'll try to keep it light on the grammar terms. So, here we go. Can you use they to refer to just one person? Is it people trying to change a language for political reasons? Let's find out. The first thing to remember is language evolves over time. English is about 1400 years old, and it's changed a lot from Old English to Modern English to now. The clearest example to see this is with another pronoun, thou. Shakespeare used thou and thy, but by the 17th century, those faded away as they fell out of use. Now, thou is mainly associated with the King James Version of the Bible. Also, it's worth noting that when English lost thou, it also lost its plural you. That's why forms like y'all, yous, and yins evolved, to make the distinction when we're talking to one person versus a group. Alright, so point number 2, politics affects language. Losing thou may have happened by accident, sort of a gradual evolution of the language, but there are other times when the language was changed deliberately. For example, the spelling differences between British English versus American English, a topic living in Europe as an American I am all too familiar with. These changes happened in 1830 when Noah Webster was compiling his first dictionary. Webster wanted to reform spelling and set the language spoken in America apart from the language spoken in Great Britain. That's why words like color, favorite, traveled, and realize look different. While this is spelling, not grammar, this still shows that politics and, to a certain extent, ideology can affect a language. So, point 2.5, geography can affect grammar. So, if your point is it's too confusing to use the word they to refer to just one person, I have some bad news for you. Using singular and plural pronouns is already a little bit confusing in English. This is a little confusing, but stay with me. So, pop quiz. Which is correct? The family are happy, the family is happy. Sorry, trick question. Depending on where you are, both those sentences are correct, which is a little bit weird, but one grammatical difference between the US and the UK, collective nouns. Collective nouns refer to a group of people, like sports teams, musical groups, and city councils. In Britain, collective nouns get treated as a plural, because there's many people. However, in the US, because it's one group, they get treated as a singular noun. One thing. Weird, right? Try explaining that to a group of English students. Which brings me to my next point. There is no standard English. Unlike French with Académie Française, there is no worldwide standard for English. Not for spelling, punctuation, grammar, or even vocabulary. Saying you're going to watch football while eating chips can mean different things depending on where you are. English may have originated in England, but the American variety is a bit more popular now, thanks in part to things like Hollywood and pop culture. So it also makes sense that English will involve a change a little bit depending on what country it's used. Australia, Canada, South Africa, to name a few, are all places that have English as the official language. This is why we have to rely on other types of standards. For example, the guidebooks used by media. For example, the AP Style book began using they as a singular pronoun in 2017. Also heard that he can be used as a general neutral singular pronoun, kind of like how man can be used for people in general. There's a couple of problems with that, however. Using he as gender neutral is an idea that goes back to Middle English, but since then, English has changed a lot, and the pronoun he is now used to refer to a man. There's also been a push to have more gender neutral words in English, humankind for mankind, for example, not to mention jobs like police officer for policeman and firefighter for fireman. So people use they for one person without being ordered to by anyone, and this is important. I'm not going to get into a whole descriptive versus prescriptive debate about grammar. However, the fact remains that many English authors, the earliest Chaucer in the 1300s to William Shakespeare to George Orwell, have used they as a singular pronoun. Further, it's very natural for native speakers of English to use they as a singular pronoun when they don't know who they're talking about or when they don't know the gender of the person they're talking about. For example, I look outside and I see a car with a meter about to expire. Which one would I say? 1, they should move their car. 2, he or she should move his or her car. Or 3, one should move their car. So obviously I'm going to go with number 1. Sentences 2 and 3 just sound awkward, a little too formal, and clunky. This is also the problem with using one as a pronoun, or words like anyone, everybody, and anyone. They can just tend to sound in this context a little bit too awkward and too formal. Point number 5. It isn't used for people. It may be singular, but how we use it versus how we use he and she is very different. For example, some people use he and she to refer to their pets, myself included. Also, some people use the pronoun she when talking about their vehicles, like boats or cars. And the only time we ever use it to refer to people is when it's for infants who haven't been born yet. For example, in these signs, it's a boy, it's a girl. And that's why it's never been common to refer to people as it. I mean, if our pets get pronouns, even our cars, there's no way we can justify referring to a person as it. The only time we use it to refer to people is when we're talking about monsters. For example, this quote from Frankenstein. The 6th point I want to make is that he or she really isn't about biological gender. Usually we rely on what a person looks like to determine if we're going to use he or she. Unless we're doctors, no one's ever really going to ask a total stranger personal questions about their biology. As Contrapoints made clear in her video about pronouns, he/she pronouns predate any ideas about biological sex based on chromosomes. Further, we're often okay with the biological sex not matching perfectly with the pronoun. For example, Varys the eunuch in Game of Thrones and Ariel from The Little Mermaid. We know Tickle varies he and Ariel she. There's no questions about biology, about genitals, about gender. And when people do fall outside the traditional categories of men and women, for example, more masculine women or more feminine man, polite people usually try to work around it, ask, or avoid using pronouns altogether. Also, there are people who fall outside the scientific categories of men and women. Aside from trans people, there are people who are born intersex, with chromosomes that aren't XX or XY. This is why insisting that he and she must refer to biological gender doesn't make any sense. English pronouns predate gene discovery by centuries. When we do try to police people's gender, it gets awkward or dangerous very quickly, not to mention a huge invasion of privacy. For example, the story from Detroit about a woman with short hair getting thrown out of a restaurant in fish bones. Besides, there's other times when the grammar may not match up perfectly to the biology. For example, the phrase, "we're pregnant." If your friend tells you that, and your first reaction is to say, "You're probably not both pregnant," you fail. The correct answer is, congratulations. I mean, you could choose to point out that only one person in the couple is really biologically pregnant, but why? We can also be used by one person when referring to a group. There's the royal we, the editorial we used by newspapers, and the we that couples use when talking about making joint plans. There's other times when fixating on pronouns might seem really rude. For example, if we're talking about families with stepchildren or adopted children. Making a distinction between your children versus your partner's children is only going to lead to problems in a family. Likewise, if a nosy neighbor asks you, "Are those your children?" That's a pretty invasive question. Unless we're a lawyer talking about adoption rights, or we're a doctor asking about hereditary issues, there's no real reason to make a distinction between someone's biological children versus someone's adopted children. Especially as a teacher, there's no way that I can ever ask my students directly about their biological sex. That's unprofessional, it's creepy, and it crosses so many boundaries. One other thing, this is not a new topic. When researching this, I found this article from 1975 about this idea. And it refers to people arguing about they since the 1880s. This is not a new idea. They as a singular pronoun has been a long time coming in English. So for point number 7, I am going to break out some grammar terms. An actual grammar rule. Pronouns replace nouns. Words like he, she, it, they, and we take the place of nouns when we're talking, so we don't have to repeat someone's name constantly. Keep this in mind for my next point. Sometimes in life, people ask us to call them something. Maybe someone's outgrown a childhood nickname. Maybe someone got married and they have a new name. Maybe it's a new title, like doctor. There's other times when we might use different names. For example, in my Polish classes, I'm called Evelina, not Evelyn. Likewise, sometimes my Polish students ask to be called by the anglicized version of their name. Michael for Mihao, or Luke for Wukaj, for example. Further, sometimes my Chinese students have asked me to call them by American names they've taken, because their Chinese ones might be too difficult for Americans to pronounce. People can pick their names. Even if it's something not on their birth certificate, when someone asks you to call them something, it's pretty rude not to ignore that request. We're just sort of conditioned in society that when people ask us to use a certain name, we're okay with that. So why not with pronouns? So language is always changing and evolving, which is what makes teaching it and learning it so fascinating but also such a challenge. To wrap up, there aren't any good arguments against using they as a singular pronoun. There's grammatical reasons for it, historical basis for it. Chaucer did it, Shakespeare did it, and you should too. So, thanks a lot for watching. I've left links to all my research in the description. This is my very first video, so if you leave a comment, I'd appreciate it.